Right, continuing into Unit 5, we're going to get into genetics, and we're going to break genetics down really into several pieces, so buckle up. We're going to have a lot of different videos on this. But this first one, we're going to focus just on the introduction to genetics, and then in the later videos, we'll get into Mendelian genetics, probability, pedigrees, non-Mendelian genetics, and some other things as well. But why do we care about genetics in the first place? The fact that we can study how characteristics are inherited can really help us understand how we originated and how life itself originated. It can also help us make predictions about our own life decisions. So for example, if you knew that you were genetically at risk of a certain condition, you may decide to have children or not have children based on that information. Now we're going to get into some of the basic kind of terminology for genetics in this video. Now, with this topic, you do want to pay attention to the language, as there's a lot of terminology that can apply to different things or is going to sound really similar to itself. So we want to be a little careful. Definitely take some time to understand the definitions of a lot of these terms we're going to get into. So we're looking at genetics, we're really focused on those organisms that sexually reproduce, like ourselves as humans. And so since we sexually reproduce, every single one of us has 2 copies of every single chromosome. One of the copies of the chromosome you got from your mom, and the other copy of the chromosome you got from your dad, right? So if we remember that each of these chromosomes, right, we have, let's say we're looking at chromosome 7, you have 2 chromosome 7s because you got one of your 7s from mom, one of your 7s from dad. These are called homologs because they have the same genes. So the same, let's say we're looking at eye color or hair color. So the same genes found in the same spot, right? So all the genes are in the same order, found in the same locations, even though one of those chromosomes came from your mom and the other came from your dad. Those genes, though, can be different alleles, meaning you can have the brown eye allele from your mom and the blue eye allele from your dad. They're both eye color genes, but just different versions. So like I mentioned in lab, I like to think of it as candy brands and flavors. So think of the gene as the candy brand like Starburst, and the alleles like the different flavors. So a cherry Starburst versus a lemon Starburst. And so the alleles are going to be found on the chromosomes in the same spot, and they're going to be the same gene, right? Just different versions of that gene. Now, when we're in the G1 phase of interphase, all the chromosomes are linear like this. But after we go through S phase, we've replicated DNA, and so all of the chromosomes now look like this, more X-shaped, because they've been duplicated. So the sister chromatids, like this guy and this guy, these guys are twins. They're 100% identical from start to finish. The homologs, though, which would be like this dark green and this like light gray green, they have the same type of information, but they're not 100% identical. So you'll want to know the difference between homologs and sister chromatids. If you're still struggling with that, definitely come to a live session and we can talk about it more. But otherwise, pay attention to the definitions of each because they're very similar, but they're not the same. So how do we inherit these genes? How did you get one chromosome from your mom and one from your dad? So if you remember from meiosis, right, every cell is going to start as a diploid cell, meaning you have 2 copies of every chromosome. And so we have 23 of these pairs, giving us 46 total chromosomes, meaning we have 2 copies of every gene. We go through meiosis, and we form daughter cells that are haploid. So they have just 1 copy. And the reason we're doing that, right, we're making a haploid egg and a haploid sperm, is because they are going to reunite, which brings us back to 2 copies. The reunification process is what we call fertilization, in that the egg and sperm are fused together, and that creates the new offspring. So now the new offspring has this one chromosome that it got from mom and this one chromosome it got from dad, giving us 2 copies of each gene. So heredity is another term we want to be familiar with, in that this is the passing of the characteristics from parent to offspring through genes. So we're looking at traits or characteristics that have a genetic component. And so we can look at inheritance patterns to determine kind of how things are passed down, and makes it easier for us to study that. For this unit, we're focusing on what we call single gene traits, and we're going to simplify things down to single gene traits most of the time, where basically one gene tells us one trait. Like if we're saying you either have the blue eye allele or the brown eye allele, and that tells you eye color. For the most part, this is not the case. Most things are influenced by many genes working together, and that does include things like hair color and eye color and height and skin color and so on and so forth. We're going to simplify it down. So for the examples we're using, like hair color or eye color, we're going to simplify it down, but keep note that even the examples we go into are probably influenced by many genes rather than one. So like I said, most human traits are influenced by multiple genes, and then on top of that, the environment can also come into play. So we'll talk about that as we go through this unit a little bit deeper, but we wanted to at least get started on some of these things so that they're not completely unfamiliar. Definitely take the time with this video to get familiar with some of the terminology and prepare yourself to get familiar with even more terminology in the next few videos. So here are some examples of some actual single gene traits, but like I said, most things are going to be affected by many genes working together. So if we're looking at cats, because why not? Fur length in cats is controlled by one gene. You can have long fur or short fur. And then coat color is also controlled by that. You can have white hair or you can have a color. And so, like I mentioned, these are some single gene traits, but for the most part, things are influenced by many genes working together. We're going to simplify things down so that we can understand the concepts in a much more digestible fashion.